Marcus Thompson had been working his small ranch outside Amarillo, Texas, for nearly 15 years when he found her. The morning started like any other in September 1985: coffee before dawn, checking the cattle, mending fence posts that never seemed to stay fixed. The autumn air carried that crisp promise of winter, and Marcus was grateful for the solitude his 100-acre spread provided. At 62, he'd grown accustomed to the quiet life after his wife Helen passed 3 years prior. He was riding his old mare Buttercup along the eastern fence line when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Hanging from the massive oak tree that marked his property line was a young girl, maybe 16 or 17, with long black hair and bronze skin. A crude wooden sign hung around her neck reading, "No Mercy for Redskins," in jagged black letters. Marcus's hands shook as he dismounted, his heart hammering against his ribs. The girl was unconscious but breathing, her wrists bound with rough rope that had left angry red marks. Her traditional Kiowa dress was torn and dirty, suggesting she'd been through hell before ending up here. Marcus carefully cut her down, catching her small frame in his weathered arms. She was lighter than she should have been, clearly malnourished and dehydrated. He carried her to his pickup truck, laying her gently in the passenger seat before racing back to his farmhouse. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away, but something told him this girl needed more than medical attention. She needed safety. As he drove, Marcus's mind raced with questions. Who had done this? Why? And how had they gotten onto his property without him knowing? The local sheriff's department had a reputation for being less than helpful when it came to crimes against Native Americans. Marcus had heard the whispered stories in town, seen the way certain families were treated differently. His own progressive views had made him something of an outsider among his neighbors, especially after he'd spoken up at town meetings about equal treatment for everyone in their community. At the hospital, Dr. Rebecca Martinez worked quickly to assess the girl's condition. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, bruising consistent with physical abuse, and signs of psychological trauma. When the girl finally woke up, her dark eyes held a terror that made Marcus's chest tighten with rage. "My name is Marcus," he said softly, sitting beside her hospital bed. "You're safe now. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Annie," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Annie Crow Feather. They took me from the reservation school, said I needed to learn my place." Marcus felt his jaw clench. The reservation was 60 miles north, and he knew the tensions between the local white community and the Kiowa people had been escalating lately. Some of the more vocal ranchers had been complaining about problems with Native Americans, using language that made Marcus sick to his stomach. Over the next few hours, Annie slowly revealed her story. She'd been walking home from school when 3 men in a pickup truck grabbed her. They'd held her for 2 days, threatening and intimidating her before deciding to make an example of her. The sign around her neck wasn't just cruelty, it was a message to her people. Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The sheriff who arrived at the hospital was exactly what Marcus expected, a pot-bellied man named Curtis Webb, who'd held the position for over 20 years through a combination of good old boy politics and willful ignorance. Webb barely glanced at Annie before pulling Marcus aside, his voice low and dismissive. "Now, Marcus, I know you mean well, but this girl's probably just telling stories. You know how they are, always trying to stir up trouble. Probably ran away from home and made up this whole kidnapping business to avoid getting in trouble with her family." Marcus felt his temper flare. "Sheriff Webb, this girl was hanging from a tree on my property with a sign around her neck. That's not some teenage runaway story. That's attempted murder and a hate crime." Webb's eyes narrowed. "You best watch your tone, Thompson. I've been keeping the peace in this county since before you moved here from whatever liberal city you came from. I'll look into it, but don't expect miracles. These reservation kids lie more than they tell the truth." After Webb left without taking a proper statement from Annie, Marcus sat with her through the night. She told him more about her captors, 3 men she'd seen around town but didn't know by name. One had a distinctive scar across his left cheek. Another drove a red Ford pickup with a dented tailgate, and the third wore a baseball cap with a Confederate flag patch. Dr. Martinez approached Marcus privately the next morning. "I've seen cases like this before," she said quietly. "This girl has been through significant trauma, and she's going to need somewhere safe to recover. Child Protective Services is overwhelmed, and honestly, placing her in the system might not be the safest option given the attitudes in this area." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. His ranch was isolated. He had plenty of room, and something about Annie reminded him of the daughter he and Helen had never been able to have. When he suggested she stay with him while they figured out next steps, Annie's relief was visible. The drive back to the ranch was quiet except for Annie's occasional directions about her attackers. She pointed out the red pickup truck parked outside Mulligan's bar, and Marcus made a mental note of the license plate. As they passed the diner where many of the local ranchers gathered for coffee, Annie tensed up and pointed to a man sitting by the window. "That's him," she whispered, "the one with the scar." Marcus looked and recognized Jake Morrison, a rancher who owned property about 10 miles south. Morrison was known for his loud opinions about keeping the county the way it was meant to be, and had been one of the most vocal opponents when the tribe had proposed building a new community center. Over the following days, Marcus helped Annie settle into Helen's old sewing room, which had the best morning light in the house. He taught her to help with the horses, and she showed him traditional Kiowa beadwork techniques her grandmother had taught her. Despite the trauma she'd endured, Annie had a strength and wisdom that impressed Marcus daily. But their peaceful routine was shattered when Marcus discovered fresh tire tracks near the oak tree where he'd found Annie, and a new message carved into the bark: "Send her back or else." Marcus stood staring at the carved threat, his weathered hands clenched into fists. The tire tracks were fresh, maybe from the night before, and they led directly to the county road that connected his property to town. Whoever had done this wanted him to know they could come onto his land any time they pleased. When he returned to the house, Annie took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. Over breakfast, he debated whether to tell her about the threat, but her sharp intelligence made the decision for him. "They came back, didn't they?" she asked quietly, setting down her coffee cup. "I heard truck engines late last night, but I thought I was dreaming." Marcus nodded grimly. "They carved a message into the tree, telling me to send you back or else." He watched her face carefully, ready to offer comfort, but Annie's expression hardened with determination rather than fear. "I won't run again," she said firmly. "I've been running from bullies my whole life, at school, in town, even on the reservation sometimes. If they want me gone, they'll have to try harder than scary messages." Her courage humbled Marcus, but also terrified him. These men had already proven they were willing to commit violence, and he was just one old rancher against what appeared to be an organized group. That afternoon, he drove into town to visit the one person he thought might help, Father Miguel Santos, at St. Catherine's Catholic Church. Father Santos had arrived in Amarillo 2 years earlier, sent by the diocese to serve the growing Hispanic population, but his ministry had expanded to include anyone who needed help regardless of their background. He'd already earned the resentment of some locals for his progressive views on social justice. "Marcus, my friend," Father Santos said, inviting him into the small church office. "You look troubled. How can I help?" Marcus explained the situation, watching the priest's face grow more serious with each detail. When he finished, Father Santos was quiet for a long moment, staring at the wooden cross on his wall. "This is not the first time I've heard such stories," the priest finally said. "There have been other incidents: harassment of native families, vandalism at the reservation school, threats against anyone who speaks up for equality. I believe there's an organized group behind it, though they're careful to stay in the shadows." Father Santos opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been documenting what I hear in confession and from community members. Nothing specific enough for legal action, but a pattern of intimidation and violence targeting Native Americans and their allies." Marcus felt his stomach sink. "How big is this group?" "Bigger than you might think, and with more influence than they should have," Some are just followers, angry men looking for someone to blame for their problems. But the leaders, Father Santos shook his head. They have connections throughout the county. Law enforcement, local government, business owners. They call themselves patriots, but they're just cowards hiding behind hatred. The priest leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Marcus, I need to tell you something that was shared with me in confidence. Sheriff Webb's nephew was arrested 3 months ago for vandalizing the tribal offices. The charges were quietly dropped, and the incident was buried. Webb isn't just ignoring these crimes, he's protecting the people committing them. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. The sheriff's dismissive attitude, the lack of investigation, the boldness of Annie's attackers. It all made sense if they believed they had protection from law enforcement. What do we do? Marcus asked. Father Santos stood and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out a business card. I have a contact at the FBI field office in Dallas. Agent Patricia Coleman specializes in civil rights violations and hate crimes. She's been trying to build cases against groups like this across Texas, but she needs witnesses willing to come forward. Marcus took the card, studying the name and number. Will Annie be safe if we involve federal agents? Safer than she is now, Father Santos replied. These men are escalating, Marcus. What they did to Annie was meant to be a warning to the entire Kiowa community. If we don't stop them now, someone's going to end up dead. That evening, Marcus sat with Annie on the front porch, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. The peaceful scene belied the tension he felt in every muscle, knowing that somewhere out there, dangerous men were planning their next move. He'd called Agent Coleman and left a message, but hadn't heard back yet. Marcus, Annie said suddenly, her voice cutting through his worried thoughts. I want to tell you something about the men who took me, something I haven't told anyone else. He turned to face her, seeing the internal struggle playing out across her young features. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, sweetheart. No, I need to. It might be important. Annie took a deep breath. When they had me tied up in that barn, they talked about other things they'd done. The man with the scar, Jake Morrison, he bragged about burning down a native family's house last month. Said they made it look like an electrical fire. Marcus felt ice in his veins. He remembered reading about that fire in the local paper. The Martinez family had lost everything, including their 8-year-old son. The newspaper had reported it as a tragic accident. They also talked about someone they called the boss, Annie continued. Someone who gives them orders and protects them when things go wrong. Morrison seemed scared of this person, kept saying they had to be careful not to disappoint the boss or there would be consequences. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of multiple vehicle engines broke the evening quiet. 3 pickup trucks were coming up his long driveway, their headlights cutting through the gathering darkness like angry eyes. Marcus recognized the red Ford with the dented tailgate from Annie's description. "Inside now," Marcus said quietly, his hand moving to the .38 revolver he'd started carrying since the tree incident. "Go to your room and lock the door. If anything happens to me, there's a rifle in my bedroom closet and Agent Coleman's number is on the kitchen counter." Annie hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but the fear in Marcus's voice convinced her to obey. As she disappeared into the house, Marcus stood on his porch and watched the trucks form a semicircle in his yard. 6 men climbed out, including Jake Morrison with his distinctive scar and another man Marcus recognized as Tom Bradley, who owned the feed store in town. "Evening, Thompson," Morrison called out, his voice carrying false friendliness. "We need to have a talk." "My property, my rules," Marcus replied steadily. "State your business or get off my land." Bradley stepped forward, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and cruel eyes. "Now, that's not very neighborly. We're here about the girl you're harboring. She's caused enough trouble, and it's time for her to go back where she belongs." "Annie's under my protection, and she's staying here as long as she wants," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The men exchanged glances, and Marcus could see the calculation in their eyes. They'd expected him to be intimidated, to back down like others probably had before. When Morrison smiled, revealing yellow teeth, Marcus knew they'd moved past threats to something more dangerous. "See, that's where you're wrong, old man," Morrison said, pulling a baseball bat from his truck. "This is our county, and we don't tolerate people who don't know their place. The girl goes back to the reservation tonight, or we'll make sure you both regret it." As the 6 men began advancing toward the porch, Marcus heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. His heart leaped with hope until he realized there was only one vehicle coming, probably Sheriff Webb, who would likely side with the men threatening him rather than provide protection. The situation was about to get much worse, and Marcus knew he was running out of options to keep Annie safe. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into Marcus's yard just as the 6 men reached the bottom of his porch steps. Sheriff Webb climbed out slowly, his belly straining against his uniform shirt, and surveyed the scene with what Marcus recognized as practiced indifference. "Evening, boys," Webb said casually, nodding to Morrison and Bradley like they were old friends. "Marcus, got a call about a disturbance out here." "No disturbance, Sheriff," Marcus replied carefully, his hand still near his weapon. "Just some uninvited guests who were about to leave." Morrison laughed harshly. "We're not going anywhere until the old man sees reason. This is about community safety, Sheriff. That reservation girl is trouble, and Thompson here is protecting her instead of thinking about his neighbors. Webb hooked his thumbs in his belt and rocked back on his heels. Well now, Marcus, these are respected members of our community. Maybe you should listen to what they have to say. Sometimes compromise is the best solution for everyone involved. The implied threat in Webb's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The sheriff wasn't here to protect him. He was here to provide official cover for whatever these men had planned. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that he was completely on his own. "The only compromise I'm interested in," Marcus said loudly. Hopping Annie could hear him from inside, "is these men leaving my property before I exercise my right to defend it." That's when he heard the blessed sound of more vehicles approaching. But these weren't pickup trucks. Two black SUVs with government plates were speeding down his driveway, followed by a third vehicle he didn't recognize. The cavalry had arrived, though Marcus had no idea how. Agent Patricia Coleman stepped out of the first SUV, a tall woman with short gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She was followed by 3 other federal agents, all wearing bulletproof vests and carrying themselves like people who meant business. "Gentlemen," Agent Coleman announced in a voice that carried across the yard, "I'm Special Agent Coleman with the FBI. This property is now under federal protection as part of an ongoing civil rights investigation." The effect on Morrison and his group was immediate and dramatic. The baseball bat dropped from Morrison's hands, and several of the men started backing toward their trucks. Even Sheriff Webb looked like he'd been slapped, his face going pale in the porch lights. "Now hold on just a minute," Webb sputtered. "You can't just come into my county and—" "Sheriff Webb," Agent Coleman interrupted smoothly, "I suggest you review federal jurisdiction laws regarding hate crimes and civil rights violations. We have extensive documentation of incidents in your county, including tonight's attempted intimidation of a federal witness." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. Someone had been watching, documenting, preparing. The third vehicle turned out to belong to Father Santos, who approached the group with quiet dignity. "Agent Coleman," the priest said, "thank you for responding so quickly. I was worried we might be too late." As it turned out, Father Santos had been in contact with the FBI for months, building a case against what they discovered was an organized hate group calling itself the Lone Star Patriots. The group had been responsible for dozens of incidents across 3 counties, from property destruction to physical attacks, all targeting Native Americans and their allies. Morrison and his men were arrested on charges ranging from kidnapping and attempted murder to conspiracy and hate crimes. Sheriff Webb wasn't arrested that night, but Agent Coleman made it clear that his conduct was under investigation, and that federal marshals would be providing security for the area until the situation was resolved. As the arrested men were led away in handcuffs, Jake Morrison turned back toward Marcus with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over, old man. The boss won't let this stand." Agent Coleman heard the threat and made a note in her file. The mysterious leader of the Lone Star Patriots was still out there, but at least the immediate danger had passed. Over the following weeks, Marcus's ranch became an unlikely hub of activity. FBI agents came and went, taking statements and gathering evidence. Annie proved to be a crucial witness, her detailed memories of her captivity helping to connect her attackers to other unsolved crimes throughout the region. The story broke in the Dallas Morning News first, then spread to national outlets. FBI breaks up Texas hate group, read the headlines, accompanied by photos of the arrested men and stories about their victims. Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight as the rancher who'd risked everything to protect a Native American girl from racist violence. The attention brought both support and new threats. Flowers and letters of encouragement arrived daily from across the country, but so did anonymous phone calls and vandalism attempts. Agent Coleman assigned 2 federal marshals to patrol the ranch, and Marcus invested in a comprehensive security system. Annie handled the attention with remarkable poise for someone so young. She gave interviews to journalists and civil rights organizations, always emphasizing that her story wasn't unique. It was just the one that happened to be witnessed and documented. Her courage in speaking out encouraged other victims to come forward, strengthening the federal case. One afternoon, while Annie was working with one of the horses in the corral, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Sarah Crow Feather, Annie's aunt and a prominent educator on the Kiowa reservation, drove up in a battered pickup truck. Marcus had spoken to her several times on the phone but never met her in person. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for Annie, and not just saving her life, giving her the strength to fight back against these people who think they can terrorize our community." They sat on the porch, watching Annie work with the horses. Dr. Crow Feather was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that held both wisdom and weariness from years of fighting discrimination. Annie's parents died in a car accident when she was 12, she explained. "I've been raising her since then, trying to give her opportunities while keeping her connected to our culture. When she disappeared, I thought—" She paused, wiping away tears. "I thought I'd failed her the way this whole system has failed our people." Marcus shook his head. "Annie's strength comes from you and her heritage. All I did was give her a safe place to heal and decide how she wanted to respond." "That's everything, though," Dr. Crow Feather replied. Do you know how rare it is for someone outside our community to put themselves at risk for one of our children? Most people look the other way, make excuses, find reasons why it's not their problem. As they talked, Marcus learned more about the broader context of Annie's attack. The Lone Star Patriots had been systematically targeting Native American students who showed academic promise or leadership potential. Their goal was to intimidate young people into staying on the reservation and not pursuing higher education or careers that might challenge the existing power structure. They're terrified of losing control, Dr. Crow Feather said. When they see kids like Annie succeeding in school, learning about their rights, refusing to accept second-class treatment, it threatens everything they believe about racial hierarchy. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Coleman's arrival for her daily briefing. The federal investigation had expanded significantly, with connections discovered to similar groups in Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona. The boss that Morrison had mentioned turned out to be a wealthy rancher named Charles Whitmore, who'd been funding and coordinating hate group activities across the Southwest. "We're close to making the big arrests," Agent Coleman told them. "Whitmore thinks he's untouchable because of his political connections, but we have evidence linking him directly to multiple crimes, including the house fire that killed the Martinez boy." 3 days later, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place in the most unexpected way. Annie was helping Marcus repair a section of fence when they noticed a familiar red pickup truck parked on the county road about a quarter-mile away. Through binoculars, Marcus could see two men watching his property, one of them taking photographs. Instead of calling the FBI immediately, Annie had a different idea. "They don't know I can see them from here, right? What if I pretended to go for a walk, let them think they have a chance to grab me again?" Marcus's blood pressure spiked. "Absolutely not. These people have already tried to kill you once." "But if they try again, the FBI will catch them in the act," Annie argued. Agent Coleman said they need more evidence to connect the remaining suspects to the conspiracy. "This could be our chance." After intense discussion and over Marcus's strong objections, they called Agent Coleman to discuss the possibility. The FBI agent was initially as opposed to the idea as Marcus, but Annie's persistence and the strategic value of catching more conspirators in action eventually won out. A complex sting operation was arranged. Annie would appear to be alone on the ranch while Marcus went to town for supplies. Multiple federal agents would be positioned around the property, hidden but ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. Annie would wear a wire and a GPS tracker, and the entire area would be under surveillance. The morning of the operation, Marcus almost called it off 3 times. The thought of putting Annie at risk, even with federal protection, made him physically sick. But Annie reminded him of something that put it all in perspective. Marcus, these men killed an 8-year-old boy. They've terrorized families, destroyed lives, and they're still out there planning more attacks. If we don't stop them now, how many more people will suffer? The bait was set by noon. Marcus drove to town, making sure to be seen at the hardware store and post office. Within an hour, the red pickup truck left its position on the county road and started up his driveway. This time there were 4 men in 2 vehicles. They approached the house cautiously, clearly expecting a trap but unable to resist what appeared to be a perfect opportunity. Annie sat on the front porch, seemingly absorbed in reading a book, looking completely vulnerable. "Well, well," called out a voice Marcus recognized through his radio earpiece as belonging to Tom Bradley. "Look who's all alone today. Where's your protector now, girl?" Annie looked up with perfectly performed surprise and fear. "He went to town. Please, I haven't done anything wrong." "Oh, but you have," Bradley said, approaching the porch with 3 other men. "You've been talking to federal agents, telling lies about good people. That makes you a very bad girl who needs to learn some respect." What Bradley and his companions didn't know was that their every word and movement was being recorded by multiple devices. As they moved closer to Annie, federal agents began closing in from positions around the property. The trap was sprung when Bradley reached for Annie's arm. "Time to go for another ride," he snarled. And that's when Agent Coleman's voice boomed across the yard through a megaphone. "Federal agents, you're surrounded. Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air." The next few minutes were chaos as the 4 men realized they'd walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. 2 of them tried to run and were tackled by agents. Bradley pulled a knife and made a desperate grab for Annie, only to find himself face down in the dirt, with his arms cuffed behind his back before he could take 2 steps. The arrest of Bradley and his associates provided the final evidence needed to bring down the entire Lone Star Patriots organization. Under interrogation, Bradley revealed the full scope of their activities and confirmed Charles Whitmore's role as the financier and strategic leader of the group. Whitmore was arrested at his 10,000-acre ranch 2 days later, along with a cache of weapons, detailed plans for future attacks, and financial records showing payments to hate groups across multiple states. The arrest made national news, with federal prosecutors calling it one of the largest domestic terrorism cases in recent Texas history. Sheriff Webb was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, though he ultimately resigned rather than face federal charges. His deputy, Maria Gonzalez, was appointed interim sheriff and proved to be far more committed to equal justice for all citizens. The trials began 6 months later and lasted for nearly a year. Marcus and Annie both testified, their powerful testimony helping to secure convictions for all the major players in the conspiracy. Morrison received 25 years for kidnapping and attempted murder. Bradley got 15 years for his role in multiple attacks, and Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison for his leadership of the organization and his connection to the Martinez family fire. Throughout the legal proceedings, Annie continued living with Marcus, who had officially become her guardian with Dr. Crow Feather's blessing. She finished high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study law at the University of Texas, determined to become a civil rights attorney. The day before Annie left for college, she and Marcus sat on the same porch where so much of their story had unfolded. The ranch was peaceful now, the security measures no longer necessary, but both of them had been forever changed by their experience. "I keep thinking about that morning when I found you," Marcus said quietly. "How close we came to losing you entirely, and how different everything might have been if I'd decided to check the fence line an hour later." Annie smiled, but her expression was thoughtful. "I don't think it was chance, Marcus. I think you were meant to find me, and I was meant to survive so we could stop those men together. Everything that happened, the media attention, the FBI investigation, the trials, it all started with one person choosing to do the right thing instead of looking the way." The impact of their story extended far beyond their personal experience. The Lone Star Patriots case became a model for federal prosecution of hate groups, and the publicity surrounding Annie's courage inspired new civil rights legislation in Texas. A foundation was established in the name of 8-year-old Miguel Martinez, providing legal aid and protection for victims of hate crimes across the Southwest. Marcus continued ranching, but also became a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences and civil rights events. He always insisted that he wasn't a hero. He was just someone who couldn't stand by while an innocent person suffered. Annie graduated from law school and returned to Texas to work for the Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney General's office. Her first major case involved prosecuting the remnants of copycat groups inspired by the Lone Star Patriots, continuing the work that had begun with her own rescue. On the 10th anniversary of her attack, Annie returned to the ranch for a quiet commemoration. She and Marcus walked to the old oak tree where she'd been found, but instead of the ugly scar where the hateful message had been carved, they found something different. Working with a local artist, Marcus had commissioned a beautiful metal plaque to be mounted on the tree. It read, "In memory of all victims of hatred, and in celebration of those who choose courage over indifference, may this place that once witnessed cruelty now stand as a testament to justice and human dignity." As they stood together under the ancient oak, Annie reflected on how much had changed since that terrible September morning in 1985. The men who had tried to break her spirit were spending their lives in prison. The community that had once turned a blind eye to injustice now had federal oversight and reformed leadership. Most importantly, other victims had found the strength to speak out, knowing that their voices would be heard and their attackers would face consequences. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" Annie asked Marcus as they walked back toward the house. Marcus stopped and looked at her, no longer the terrified girl he'd found hanging from a tree, but a confident young woman who'd turned her trauma into a force for justice. "Never," he said firmly. "Finding you was the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Everything that followed, the danger, the media attention, the trials, it was all worth it to see you become the person you were meant to be." As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Marcus Thompson and Annie Crow Feather stood together on the porch of the little ranch house that had become a symbol of resistance against hatred. Their story had begun with an act of horrific cruelty, but it had become something far more powerful, a testament to the truth that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to let evil triumph through their silence. The legacy of their courage would continue to inspire others for generations to come, proving that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most desperate circumstances.